Welcome to the CHCI Tech Summit panel, Investing in the Future of Technology. We would like to thank our generous friends at Uber for making this session possible. Our moderator for today's session is Jason Oxman, President and CEO of the Information Technology Industry Council. The ITIC is a global trade association for the tech sector, representing nearly 70 of the world's most innovative companies. Jason brings more than 20 years of experience as a globally recognized leader in technology advocacy. Please join me in welcoming Jason Oxman.
Hello and welcome to our discussion of important issues related to technology policy, innovation, economic recovery, and social justice. My name is Jason Oxman. I'm the president and CEO of ITI, the trade association of the technology industry. It's my pleasure to moderate this important discussion today. And I want to welcome our audience and start off by thanking CHCI and its president and CEO, Marco Davis, and the entire CHCI team for convening this important discussion today. I'm looking forward to an interactive dialogue with all of you, our important audience members, as part of this discussion. I want to thank you for joining our conversation and remind you to participate in the conversation by using the hashtag CHCI Summit. That's CHCI Summit in all of your social media communication about this discussion. ITI, as the trade association of the technology industry, is proud to represent the world's most innovative technology companies. And at this important moment in political change and economic challenge, as well as the health pandemic that so many are facing, it's important that we have a discussion about how policy and policymakers can make an important and lasting difference based on the decisions that they make. We know that technology tools, that services and resources are integral to the ongoing response to COVID-19. We also know that they will help mitigate the virus's effect on the economy and the people impacted by the virus. So today we want to have a conversation about how businesses and community leaders, policymakers and educators can make the right decisions to make the right change. We want to make sure those investments also impact the communities that need them most, in particular communities of color that are too often left behind. We have a terrific group of leaders and experts on our panel today, and I want to introduce them to you one at a time, give them an opportunity to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into our important discussion and answer questions from our audience about the topics that we're reviewing today. As I have the great opportunity to introduce our panelists to you, let me start with Andrea Sanchez. Andrea, welcome. We're delighted to have you here on the panel with us today. Please tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. And I just want to say thank you as well to CHCI for hosting this important discussion, and to everyone out there who is watching. I am a lawyer by training who worked on immigration, labor, and criminal justice issues for over a decade. I'm also the former executive director of the AI Now Institute at NYU, which is a research institute that's dedicated to studying the social implications of artificial intelligence. And currently, I'm the director of communications and public affairs for Columbia University's Justice Lab, although I'm not speaking in my official Columbia capacity today, since we're covering issues more under the purview of my former position.
Terrific. Andrea, welcome. We're delighted to have you here for this important discussion. Let me next introduce our audience to Zoraida Rodriguez Montenegro, who joins us from Uber today. Zoraida, please tell our audience a little bit about your portfolio at Uber.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm delighted and excited to be here. I am also an attorney by training, and I currently serve as public policy manager at Uber Federal Affairs team based in Washington, D.C. Prior to this role, I've been in Central America and the Caribbean, overseeing the public policy work there based in Panama, where I am originally from. And before joining Uber, I was working in Switzerland, serving as Deputy Permanent Representative of Panama to the World Trade Organization and other organizations. And today I'm very excited to be talking about everything that we have to talk here. So thank you.
Terrific. So, Rhina, welcome. Let me next introduce Damon Lester, who is president of the National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers. National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers. I didn't think automobile was the word I was going to get stuck on there, Damon, but sorry about that. And please tell us a little bit about your background and the organization.
Hey, thank you, Jason. Yes, my name is Damon Lester, and I'm president of the National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area, and we represent ethnic minority-owned new car dealerships throughout the U.S., advocating for the increased number of minority-owned new car dealerships in the country.
Terrific. Damon, welcome. It's great to have you here. And our final panelist is Mike French. Mike is the Vice President of Space Systems at the Aerospace Industries Association. Mike, great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about AIA and your area of focus.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason. And thank you to CHCI for having me on the panel today. The Aerospace Industry Association advocates for policies that help the U.S. industry, but also spends a lot of time thinking about our workforce, which is so important to everything we do. I specifically focus on space issues. Formerly worked at NASA as well as an aerospace attorney. And so looking forward to the discussion today and bringing our insights.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's great to have you here. And thanks to all four of our panelists. And let's bring all four of our panel members back to the group and start in with our discussion. And Andrea, I'm going to start with you with the first question. I think one thing that's really important to look at, given the diverse number of industries that we have represented on our panel today and the important economic and pandemic recovery issues that we want to talk about, the role of the technology industry there. Really important to talk about public-private partnerships and what you've seen be successful in the marketplace, and advice that you would provide to policymakers about public-private partnerships that work particularly well. Andrea, can we start with you? What is your perspective on this?
Absolutely. And I think there has been a major surge in the integration of privately owned technology with public systems. Some of these uses are benign. Others really do have the potential to deliver some notable public benefits. But I think it's worth noting that there are also many public-private partnerships that are coming at a cost, and it's a cost that Black and Latino communities in particular are having to bear. The example I'm going to point to is police surveillance. It's one of the biggest growing areas of public-private partnership between tech companies and police departments. Even ICE agents are in on the action, routinely using private facial recognition technology to actually mine millions of DMV photos for possible matches. There's an organization called Just Futures, which just recently documented how a lot of states are actually selling huge amounts of personal data from DMV databases to private companies and law enforcement agencies, including ICE. The idea, of course, is that it will improve public safety and national security by helping police catch people committing crimes and ICE deport people who aren't here legally. But so far, there's been very little evidence to support that these multi-million-dollar systems are actually making us safer. What the data does show, however, is that these partnerships are often reinforcing racial biases around who commits crime, and that they perpetuate the over-policing of Black and Latino communities. And especially when technologies like facial recognition are involved, the systems routinely misidentify Black and brown faces, potentially leading to innocent people being charged with crimes they didn't commit, or people being processed for deportation when they're actually here legally. And I think the real issue here is that there aren't currently any legal guardrails that are specifically designed for these public-private partnerships. It's not necessarily the public-private partnerships that are problematic in themselves, say that 5 times fast, but there aren't regulatory regimes governing this intersection. So for me, there are public benefits, potential ones, to public-private partnerships, and I'm sure my co-panelists will talk about those. But if they're going to continue, we're going to need stronger transparency, accountability, and oversight in these areas.
And Andrea, it's interesting to note that I know a lot of technology companies that have been involved in the use of AI technologies, particularly surveillance technologies, have actually echoed your call for policymakers to adopt rules of the road to make sure that they are aware of what those requirements are. And as you noted, those requirements will be particularly important and helpful in making sure the technology is deployed in the right way. Zoraida, I want to turn to you next and ask about the kind of public-private partnerships that you've seen at Uber that have been particularly effective. Uber obviously is a pioneer in transportation and technology, and it's an area that a lot of governments are involved in as well. What have you seen work well in public-private partnerships, and what's your advice to policymakers?
Well, I want to focus my comments on the current situation that we're all living in, and it's a COVID-19. And as you know, we've been actively monitoring the coronavirus situation and continue to work to help keep those who rely on platform healthy and safe. And since the start of the pandemic, Uber supported riders and drivers, encouraging people to stay at home through an in-app messages and in our campaign of thanking users for not riding. And we work with the CDC and the WHO to develop safety tips specific to ride sharing and delivery. We launched Wash, Wear, Air campaign, no mask, no rides policies, develop a new technology that verifies if a driver is wearing a mask by taking a selfie, and the driver will not be able to start accepting trips until verifying that they are wearing masks, and go online checklists for riders and drivers and delivery people to confirm that they have taken certain steps to help stop the spread of COVID-19. Also, with the side of the restaurants, we've sent posters developed in partnership with the CDC to more than 160,000 restaurant partners so far in the United States, highlighting health and safety tips for delivery people, customers, and staff. And we work with public health experts also to consult and develop processes and policies for sharing information, and with public health authorities that focus on speed while also prioritizing privacy. We have a team available 24/7 to support public health authorities in the response to the epidemic. And working with them, we may temporarily suspend the accounts of riders or drivers confirmed that to have contracted or been exposed to COVID-19. And we also consulted with epidemiologists to make sure that our efforts as a company are grounded in medical advice. And we also have a team of a law enforcement team portal to fit the needs of public health authorities. And we receive feedbacks, and look into our own data. We develop process to standardize the request process and allow for better contact tracing and faster response times. We also develop a protocol for COVID positive cases, and any driver who is diagnosed with COVID-19 or individually asked to self-isolate by a public health authority will receive financial assistance for up to 14 days while their account is on hold. So we have many partnerships in different areas, but I wanted to highlight that it's been very helpful for this particular moment to work with others in trying to stop the spread and receive advice from public health authorities.
Very impressive partnerships and important work. I think I am probably not alone in being one of the viewers of that Uber commercial that you referred to, and initially being confused why Uber was telling me not to take an Uber ride and how much Uber was not looking forward to seeing me. But you were first out of the gate in launching that kind of selfless advertising to help protect your customers and your Uber partner drivers. And it was very impressive and great to see. Damon, the automobile industry, obviously one that relies very heavily on partnerships with governments, and I'm curious about your policy roadmap and the kind of public-private partnerships that you have been and will be advocating for as we look to hopefully come out of this pandemic sooner than later.
Well, yeah, well, thank you. And for auto, I mean, for the future for auto, this incoming administration and especially the state of California have already announced that by the year 2035, the no longer selling of fuel vehicles will be able to take place in that state. And it looks like the current incoming administration is going to adopt that or a hybrid of that. The challenge with it is that our country doesn't have the infrastructure to withhold a full-fledged of electric vehicles or electric vehicle fleet for every family in this country. And so there's a huge opportunity for public-private partnerships to help put that infrastructure together. There's a huge opportunity for public-private partnerships to create jobs in this arena, because it's going to take a whole village to be able to create these opportunities, to create the infrastructure within parking garages and mall parking lots, and as well as even in your homes, because you will be required to have some type of electric vehicle fuel station within your home or somewhere in this vicinity. So there's a lot of infrastructural opportunities from both the private and the public sector that we need to look at to opportunities to advance.
It's funny to think of that kind of infrastructure you're talking about. I think I think of parking meters and other things that are placed by municipalities across streets, and the idea of having charging stations there certainly makes a lot of sense too. It's an important role for government to provide the funding and the infrastructure for if they want to encourage electric vehicles. An excellent point. Mike, the aerospace industry has a number of elements to it, and you're focused on the space elements of the aerospace industry. And I'm curious about the technology, infrastructure investment, and innovation, public-private partnerships that you've seen work well and will continue to work well. I think it's something that a lot of us tune into to see those public-private partnerships come to fruition on launch days. But curious to hear what your roadmap looks like.
Thanks, Jason. It's really interesting. The history of public-private partnerships in aerospace is probably almost 100 years old. So it goes back to early days of the U.S. government supporting early aircraft service by doing airmail. And so an early way where the government helped support, developing airplane industry. And so that spirit has really continued throughout on the aeronautics side, with a lot of the safety and environmental features on an airplane you fly on. Those were all parts of a lot of public-private partnerships working with NASA and the FAA on developing those technologies. And then we've seen that really take off in space over the last decade or so. And so if you watch this weekend, there was another launch, the International Space Station, that was developed under a program started under the Obama administration, and actually even a little bit prior to that, called Commercial Cargo and Crew, which was the idea of using public-private partnerships to basically provide a service to get things to the International Space Station. Something that was a new way of thinking about this. As we look to the future, NASA is going to use more of these. In fact, in the next couple of years, you'll see public-private partnership-based agreements to land small rovers onto the moon by private companies. And so an area that has a long history in aerospace, and one that's you'll see continue.
Very interesting. Thanks, Mike, and thanks to all our panelists for walking through those challenges and opportunities in the areas of public and private partnerships. Andrea, I want to circle back to you on an issue that you raised on the challenges side of technology innovation, particularly as we start to talk about Latino communities You mentioned some of the challenges of police surveillance, and I wanted to ask, as you're very focused on academic research in these areas and social justice opportunities as well, is there a way in which that we should be thinking about solutions as these technologies are deployed that are ones that address the risk to the Latino community? You highlighted some of the concerns that you have about technology being used in a way that poses those risks, but I wonder if there are ways that we can think about and take action that allows us to take advantage of new technology in a way that's beneficial to the Latino community. Can you share some of your thoughts on that?
Sure, yeah. And I'll speak mostly to AI here because it's the technology I'm most familiar with. And I think with AI, the problem is that the technology often doesn't always work as advertised. In fact, it's often error prone when it comes to Latinos and people of color, and yet it continues to be used in some of the most high stakes environments. Police using facial recognition to charge people with crimes is one example I talked about. It's also being used in some public housing to determine who gets entry. It's even being used in some instances to screen job candidates. And Georgetown law professor Alvaro Bedoya described the DMV's use of facial recognition software as follows. The question isn't whether you're undocumented, but rather whether a flawed algorithm thinks you look like someone who's undocumented. And that's a distinction that could have devastating repercussion for Latinos. And even when AI works as advertised, it could be used in discriminatory ways. Take predictive policing, for example, which refers to systems that use algorithms to analyze data and aim to forecast where a crime may occur, who might commit it, or who could be a victim. But even that relies on data, which mostly reflects police practices and policies, not actual crime rates. So that means it fails to account for the absence of crime data. For example, it doesn't account for the fact that many undocumented communities tend to underreport crime. In terms of how to mitigate and address these risks, I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak to technical solutions. But what I can say is in order for any of those technical solutions to work, we need at least two things to happen. One, we can't remedy bias in AI or other tech systems where I'm sure it also exists until those systems become less opaque. Became less opaque. We need more transparency and data around how the systems work and how they're being used in order to fully understand their impact, because as researchers, a lot of people don't even have access to really fully examine the impact of these systems, the good and the bad. And number two, we need to increase diversity at these companies themselves. Researchers have found that AI systems in particular are reflections of the humans who built them. They're trained to interpret the world as their creators see it. And currently, those creators are predominantly white, wealthy, male engineers. So I think the more diverse perspectives we can get inside tech companies, the more that the needs and lived experiences of our community, the Latino community, will be reflected in the technology that comes out of them.
That's an excellent point, and your broader point about the importance of the data that's going into the algorithm being good data, influencing what comes out of the algorithm and out of the AI. But it's even more basic than that. It's the people who are programming that information and programming that data. So, Zoraida, I want to ask you to pick up on Andrea's point about the need to increase diversity among Latinos in the technology industry. The technology industry, like many other industries in this country, is facing the very real truth of the need to do a better job of increasing the diversity of its ranks. And to Andrea's point, it has an impact not only on the companies themselves, but on the products and services that the companies produce. So, Zoraida, I want to ask you, and then I want to ask other panelists to weigh in if they have ideas as well. What are some ways that you're encouraging the technology industry to increase its diversity, particularly in Latino communities?
Yeah, very well. Thank you for the opportunity. Definitely, we think that it's important, obviously, to be part of the ecosystem. Corporations could have a very good, a high and important role in evaluating their own systems to improve, for instance, their spending level. directly with diverse owned suppliers and invest in tools and services, providing insights into the diversity profile of the suppliers their vendors use, for example. Also, one thing that we are doing is work on our diversity and inclusion commitments. We released last week our diversity and inclusion report, where we committed, among other things, to double the pipeline, the talent pipeline, and we want to create pathways for drivers, delivery people, and Uber customer support staff, many of whom are people of color, to advance their careers. We'll aim also to double the pipeline of people who want to pursue corporate or other opportunities at Uber by 2025. Our focus at Uber continues to be on increasing the representation of women in leadership roles and Black, African American, and Hispanic Latinx employees overall. In the US, for instance, we made progress in the representation of Black African American leaders and Hispanic Latinx leaders across non-tech and tech functions. We remain laser focused on increasing representation of women and Black Latinx individuals in leadership roles, on Black African American and Hispanic Latinx employees overall, and on establishing inclusive operating norms and beliefs where people of all backgrounds can find a sense of belonging. One thing that is important about talking about diversity and how is that important, just going to Andrea's point earlier, is this year, two of our civic engagement efforts, which was one, the census online, helped people to know about the importance of the census, and also our Get Out the Vote campaigns were sent in Spanish. Communications were sent in Spanish and in English. And why was that? Because now in the federal affairs team, there is a person that speaks Spanish, and then it was an input that we provided to the team, that it was important to speak in both languages to all our community. And I think that comes from, when you have diversity, you have more input and more ways to contribute to have a more inclusive campaigns or any initiative that you do. So that will be my point on that.
Excellent, thank you. And Damon, obviously you're very focused on minority-owned auto dealers. I'm curious if you can share with us some statistics that might put in perspective how the automotive industry is doing on the dealership side in terms of ownership, and what you're really focused on specific to the Latino community or to minorities more generally on increasing dealership ownership among the minority community.
Sure. So currently there are 19,000 new car dealerships throughout the U.S. Of that 19,000, only 1,200 are owned by ethnic minorities. And within that 1,200 is about 560 or so are owned by Hispanics or Latin dealers. The challenge that we have is trying to catch up to a 60-year head start that non-minority dealers had. Most minority dealers weren't allowed to have the opportunities until post-civil rights movement. And so when you look at the buying power of the ethnic minority community combined, it's about 17 million vehicles sold last year, of which 30% of that 17 million were purchased by ethnic minorities. And within that 30%, half of it was within the Latin community. It's a huge footprint, huge market share. And so this year, as well as in previous year, but more so this year, I've been really, really trying to present that business case as a business as an imperative that diversity equals growth. We're not trying to take away from anyone's opportunities, but we need to add to it. And that needs to be added to at the C-suite level. It needs to be added at the supplier level. It also needs to be added at the entrepreneurial level. And so in order for these opportunities to grow, and as America becomes more and more diverse as a population, and then project to become the majority population within the next 20 years or so, it's more important to do these things now, so that we won't have to continue to ask and run and try to play catch up that historically we've had to do. And so one of our things at NAMAT is that we continue to provide the data to present that business case to every CEO and every automaker in the country, as well as the suppliers. Well, it's very important that we have the opportunity and footprint to get those opportunities as well. And so the data, we have to use data, and I'm glad both Andrea and Zarada both mentioned data as being a point that we have enough data now that we can use to help with our advocacy. Because before we was just rhetoric, but now we have enough data that we can quantify and present that business case.
Very interesting, and those numbers are stark about the opportunity and the work to be done. Mike, let me check in with you on these kind of diversity initiatives that are, I know, important to the aerospace industry as well. And right before we go to questions from our audience, can you tell us a little bit about aerospace industry focus on diversity initiatives and particularly those that affect the Latino community?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about the future workforce, when you think about aerospace, you might think about people bending metal or putting rivets in a wing or something like that. And really what, today, a lot of that stuff is done with additive manufacturing. The workforce you're looking at is a highly skilled computer software oriented workforce, and we look at a workforce, we're competing with Uber and, the tech sector when we look at the employees that we need. And so not only do we need this high-tech workforce, we need them to represent America, and we need the best of all types to be able to come into our companies. And so we start early on, thinking about that STEM pipeline in the K through 12 arena first. One thing we do there that has been very helpful is we have a rocketry challenge that students from around the country participate in as a way to encourage, kind of excite them about some of the potential there. And this year, what we did is we wanted to make sure that any team that wanted to compete could. And so we put together a separate grant program for those Title I schools that want to participate but didn't have the funding to do so, to allow them to get that support. And we also then paired them with some mentors to help their team forward. So, a small thing that can have an outsized impact on a school. But looking at the bigger picture, moving towards high school and then college and graduate school, we're really supportive of a lot of federal government initiatives that try to match key colleges, key students with either apprenticeship program or job training or mentorships, where we can make sure they stay in the STEM field and grow and have someone there who can maybe help them in a way where may otherwise they'd be turned away from the field or may think like it's something they don't see themselves.
Really important initiatives to start early and make sure people have the skills and the interest in the jobs of the future. And that actually segues nicely into a question from audience member Zach from Virginia. And Andrea, I want to ask you to take this question on. Zach asks, how does investing in the future of tech coincide with the future of workforce training, specifically thinking about both education and reskilling, which are incredibly important to prepare people for the jobs of the future. So as we talk about the need to increase minority representation in technology companies in the innovation economy, Andrea, what are your thoughts on how that ties into workforce training and education?
Such a great question. Thank you. So we know that more companies will use machines to carry out more of the tasks that were once done by humans. And I think optimists view this as a major boon for society, while on the flip side, there are some more apocalyptic forecasts from others saying that it's when the robots are going to take over the world. And I don't think either quite gets it right. I think while the rise of automation will certainly lead to new jobs being created, it will also disrupt and displace many occupations. And unfortunately, many, if not most, of these occupations are in industries that Latinos work in, like construction and agriculture and transportation. And even McKinsey, which tends to fall more in the optimistic camp, concluded that labor automation will further exacerbate the racial wealth gap in the US unless we intervene. And this isn't the future. It's already happening. According to a Pew report from a couple years ago, Latinos are far more likely than their white counterparts to cite automation as a key cause for why their hours or pay have been reduced, or even why they lost their job. So back to your question around investment, what these numbers tell us is that we can't just invest in technology without making equal investments in the workforce. And in order for this technology to even come close to delivering on the Optimist promise, we're going to need job training programs that specifically target communities that are going to suffer job loss and displacement. And our nation as a whole is going to have to make a bigger effort to address the inequities that have plagued our educational systems for so long. In the meantime, I also don't think that we need to accept automation as a given. Humans are ultimately in control of how and what pace the technology is implemented in. And I think that's something important to keep in mind as well, so that communities like ours have time to adjust.
And Damon, let me come down to you next for our next audience question, which is actually linked to the first question that Zach asked about investing in the future workforce. I want to get your perspective on what educational systems need to do in order to invest in future technologies. So Barbara from California asks about the connection between the need for future investment in technology and what educational systems need to do to make sure those investments reach the right people. So Damon, can you take that question?
Sure, that's an awesome question. I would say it's twofold. A lot of our schools have gone away from teaching trade, and what I mean by trade is technicians. And so, although every vehicle that's on the road today is pretty much a walking computer, it's a driving computer, and those computers are an AI in and of itself that need to be prepared. In many instances, these vehicles need technicians, particularly young technicians, to be able to adapt and be able to work on these vehicles, as that's where we're leading to for the future. So we have to look at bringing back trade from an educational standpoint, just to show a lot of these students, and even at the collegiate level as well, to teach trade, because auto technicians are pretty much electrical engineers that specialize in automobiles. The average technician makes well over $150,000. Black and brown communities don't know that. And so unless we have this education and opportunities that we can present and be able to educate and inform everyone about these opportunities, we can't help play in that playing field, or at least try to level it. And so the biggest thing we have to do collectively is bring back trade curriculum in these schools, so that we can provide jobs for people to be able to provide for their families.
It was good to see the Biden administration transition team make that a core component of their economic development plan. Four-year college degrees have an important place, but to your point, Damon, the Biden transition team mentioned specifically that we need to get back to focusing on trade schools, 2-year degrees, associate degrees, and other alternative pathways to education that prepare people for those jobs of the future. Zoraida, I want to come back to you on this question of both education and the workforce training that we've been talking about, but also given the underrepresentation of Latinos in the technology and even in financial services and other industries, how can we build a pipeline of Latino leaders so that our communities and our interests are represented in Latino communities? Can you talk to us a little bit about that, both from an education and from a community standpoint, the development of that pipeline of Latino leaders?
Sure. Yeah, you can hear me. Yes, sure. That is very important questions, both of them. I think from a education standpoint, Latinos, just speaking to the Latino community in general, everything goes around education and how you if you learn more things, you can advance more. And higher education is really, really important. And recognizing that since 2018, we partner with the Arizona State University online to offer 100% tuition assistance to qualifying drivers or an eligible family member, so they can choose from more than 80 undergraduate degree programs, English language courses to improve reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills. And also drivers or a family member can enroll in an entrepreneurship program to start, build, run a successful business. They can also, the drivers share this opportunity with an eligible spouse, domestic partner, child, sibling, parent, legal guardian, or a dependent. Another thing that is important for building these type of pipelines of Latinos, etc., we need to have in corporations, for instance, it's important to have the employee resource groups. At Uber, we have the Latino group that is called Los Ubers. And Los Ubers promotes professional development and the retaining Hispanic and Latinx talent to succeed at Uber and beyond, and also focus on recruiting Latino talent. And as I mentioned before, also having the commitment from corporations on a diverse own suppliers and invest in tools and services to provide insights into the diversity profile of the suppliers our vendors use is really important to address the diversity of a team and work and focus on that.
Mike, Damon mentioned the importance of technical training, and obviously the aerospace industry is a very technically focused industry, and education, particularly technology education, important to the future of the aerospace industry. You mentioned earlier some of the programs that your member companies are putting out in the field to encourage STEM education from a young age. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how education and these kind of programs, particularly targeted at the Latino community, can help not only improve the diversity of the workforce, but also fill a lot of critical jobs that I know the aerospace industry needs to fill in order to advance the next generation of innovation?
Yeah, and so I think I'll either second or third or maybe even fourth, some of the other panelists here. We're very strong supporters of those programs that do internships and technical education work. And we've got, so our big supporters, Department of Labor has some efforts there that we're pushing, to see those expanded. Something that some of our member companies have done, just because we're talking about this workforce transition, right, and needing a workforce that, has this technical adaptation that may be one step, different than working at school yourself. And so what we've seen is areas where we have a need for jobs in that area, a public-private partnership developing between a company or a series of companies, and then usually a local community college or high school in sort of a region, with the idea being, let's train some actual skills where at the end of this, you see a pipeline to an actual job and a high-paying, stable job too. And so I think from my perspective, as we think about how do we make sure that includes more communities, I think it's assessing, sort of where are we doing that and who are our partners. I think that also applies to the federal government. When we look at grant programs and we look at partnerships at places like NASA with universities or community colleges, are we thinking about those partners over time, right? Let's make sure we're not just going to the same places over and over again, but we're being thoughtful from a regional perspective, a diversity perspective of where those dollars are going and how people can apply and how they can remain in those programs.
Let's talk about the connection between these kind of investments in education programs, investing in technology, and the health pandemic that our nation and indeed the world currently faces. Audience member Ramon from New York asks about the connection between investments in technology and underlying social services for communities. And specifically, his question is, while investments in technology are important, there's still an underlying need to invest in social services that will eventually plug into healthcare technology and software. How do we make sure that underlying social needs are being met in sync with providing funding for the latest technologies and innovations? And I'll throw this question open to anyone on the panel who wants to take it. I think it's an interesting question about not just thinking about technology investments in the abstract, but thinking about the very real needs of communities and the connection between these programs and social services. Anyone want to take on Ramon's question?
Well, I can.
Andrea,
I can start.
You to start us off. Oh, I'm sorry, Zoraida, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I can talk. I think it's a great question. As some of you know, we have an app or a program called Uber Health. Every year, an estimated of 3.6 million Americans miss their appointments due to a lack of reliable transportation. And we recognize that the path to health may not be easy, but we know that the road to care can be. And we have been partnering closely with healthcare organizations to build something together to meet the unique transportation needs. At Uber Health, we are offering a solution that helped tens of thousands of patients and caregivers to get to and from care, and providers can also use Uber Health to help get crucial staff to work. Well, we need to meet people where they are. I think we've been talking about the barriers and some things that are preventing people to access sometimes technology, and understanding that we develop a technology that helps people that have no access to a smartphone, for instance, things elderly, to be able to receive the information for their ride to their appointment by a landline. And we also develop a printable card, so when people are outside of a healthcare facility, they can remember the information that was provided to them. Sometimes language is a barrier, and for that, we've also created these tools in different languages. And I think it's important to meet people where they are, and sometimes creating more accessible tools to help people to transition to technology and investing on this. It's important to help people to access care, for instance.
What a terrific
really
program.
Quickly,
those two. Andrea, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, since you called on me, going to meeting people where they are, I think one big step towards making the underlying social needs of patients, making sure that those are being met, or more broadly, the underlying needs of consumers are being met, is accountability. And accountability is going to require transparency around how these systems are being used and why, a mechanism for public input, and some degree of oversight and federal incentives that promote the public good.
Those are important as well. Any other thoughts on the connection between the kind of programs we've been talking about, educational efforts, technology investment, and the very important social services investments that we need to make?
I'll just jump in, just to echo what everyone has said thus far, is that there just has to be a more awareness and push to be able to provide the opportunities for everyone, right? So we have a technology issue with just having people having access to adequate Wi-Fi in this virtual world that we're in from an education standpoint. And so that too needs an infrastructure that definitely needs to be more well-versed in some areas where there's some Wi-Fi or at the internet desert, so to speak. And so we need to make sure that we are looking at, from a holistic standpoint, that everyone is able to get the same opportunities under the same tent.
Yeah, I'd say related to that is when we think about COVID specifically, we're able to use, these platforms like we are right now, but that's not applicable for every job. And so, a lot of our work is on a factory floor and people have to go to work every day. And so being thoughtful in where there's a limit of the technology option in the COVID response versus where we really got to remember we're talking about people going in, physically to work each day and making sure we're thinking about the protective equipment, the safety of their situation. So their important work can keep going on, but there's always got to be that human element in thinking about the workforce when we're thinking about the COVID side specifics.
We have time for just one more audience question before I ask our panelists to share their closing thoughts with us. And it's a question that actually relates to the point that Mike just made about the importance of making these investments in the right way. And that is the Business Roundtable, which is another organization that focuses on corporate activities, recently redefined the primary purpose of a corporation. They did so by changing a long-standing definition that the primary purpose of a corporation was to advance the interests of its shareholders by raising its stock price. And the new definition of the corporation, which I think all would agree is a better definition, is that it includes a focus on doing good by doing well, and working on economic advancement and opportunities for all Americans. So I want to ask the panelists for their thoughts, and anyone's free to jump in at first, although I may ask Zoraida to lead because she works for a publicly traded company that, as she's been talking about, has been making these kind of investments and doing things for good that don't necessarily advance the bottom line as much as they do advance society. How has this focus on doing well by doing good made Uber a better place for you to work, and Uber a better company, and done better for its customers and its partners? Zoraida, can I start with you?
Happy to take that on. Thank you very much. One of our principles as a company is to do the right thing, period. And that is what have guided us at the beginning of this pandemic to message people to stay home. When our business is to move people, we start the campaign of Move What Matters. And I think that was a powerful message, not only externally, but also internally. And that comes from a commitment from the highest level of the company to do the right thing. And technology could be for good if we want to.
Terrific. And Andrea, I'll go to you next because you're our expert here in bridging that gap that sometimes exists between the academic and the thoughts about what's the right thing to do, and the corporate, and the need to focus on the bottom line. And maybe we can make this part of your closing remarks here. How do we help emphasize, as Zoraida has set out for us, the importance of obviously focusing on the bottom line, but also recognizing that addressing these important issues is a good way to do the right thing?
Yeah, and I would just say, in some ways, I'm going to give you a bit of an academic response. I would just remind folks that although I think this is an extremely positive development, what constitutes good is inherently subjective and dependent on who's in the room. And I know that I am probably one of the more circumspect voices on this issue, and I just want to be clear that I'm not trying to hold back progress or say technology doesn't have potential to transform our world for the better. In fact, I wouldn't be so passionate about this issue if I didn't think that were true. But what I don't want is for our excitement to cause us to rush progress and diminish or ignore the incredible risks that a lot of these technologies pose. And if we're going to have a conversation on ensuring technologies are good, and that they serve the needs of Latinos and people of color, we need to have an honest discussion about not just the benefits, but also the costs. And for that matter, we also need more Latinos and people of color at the table to help come to that definition of what is good. I'm thrilled that many of my co-panelists and people participating in this event are at these companies making change, sharing their diverse perspectives, and advocating for our community. And I give them major props because that's what's going to flip the switch. So thank you to them, and thank you to CHCI for hosting this important conversation, and thanks, Jason, for moderating.
Thanks, Andrea. Mike, let me drop down to you next, and then we'll have Damon close us out. You've, in a way, already answered this because your corporate members are focused on these issues and are focused on doing the right thing. But what are your thoughts, on, as part of your closing remarks here, on making that connection between corporations doing the right thing and the need to invest in education and infrastructure and technology?
I think it's interesting, right? I mean, in our field, there's such a sense of mission. If you're helping build a spacecraft that's going to Mars and land a rover on Mars, whether you're the actual engineer building it, or someone who works in the back office, or someone who's a technician, any level, you feel like you're part of that team, and that spirit is able. You can open that spirit to anyone. Right. To me, I think it's a really good avenue for when we think about our diversity and inclusion efforts, that there is this energizing force as long as we can make sure that we reach out to the right places, that we build, sort of a set of mentors that are welcoming, perhaps into some areas where there hasn't been the diversity historically. And so I think for a lot of our companies, there's that deep-seated sense of mission that they're able to latch onto, and I think build off here in a very positive way. And so, I hope we'll continue to see those efforts and have that sort of energetic force behind it.
And Damon, I'll let you close out your thoughts. Obviously, you represent corporations, companies as well, but also have a very important socially driven mission.
I'll be very brief. Every company in America needs to take a look at itself in the mirror. And if it thinks that business diversity is lacking around that C-suite table, that they need to figure out ways to be more inclusive. And in order to be more inclusive, they need to add to that new population.
Well put. And given the important issues that all of our great panelists have raised today, it's important that we draw that connection between corporate interests and public policymakers, looking very seriously at how the decisions they make, the programs that they invest in, can help advance these important societal issues. I want to take a moment to thank all of our terrific panelists for their insights, very unique and different positions that they all represent, but some great unified messages on the importance of investing in education, STEM education, and workforce training to advance Latino communities in technology. I also want to thank CHCI and the terrific team there for convening this important discussion. Never a more important time in America than the transition to new leadership, and of course the hopefully light at the end of the tunnel from the terrible pandemic, but the need to make the investments that help our economy recover and help lift up all communities. I want to thank our terrific audience for being so engaged with us today and submitting terrific questions, and I hope you'll continue the dialogue and help advance these issues as well. Thank you.